Hello and welcome to Varn Vlog Solo. And today I'm doing something that you probably shouldn't do, which is addressing a kind of style of interaction between me and members of my Parasocial followers on social media, many of whom are hate followers because there's some perverse way in which people are addicted to yelling at things in order to be sold cheap Chinese gadgets by a nationalist website. Um, but there's also a way in which I'm dealing with things in the comments and what I see observationally. I made the observation almost a decade ago that increasingly adults that I interacted with on social media would use the fact that something was social media to not state an argument and instead just assert their position or premise and think that that was an argument in itself. And when you push back, they're like, oh, this is not a college class. I don't have to really justify myself. To which I would say, yeah, but you also don't have to say any fucking thing. um, but I started wondering when I see these statements of affectation everywhere. One of the most common criticisms of me that I get on Twitter slash X or Reddit is that I'm annoying. And when it comes to something like my voice, there's not much I can do about that. And I don't really care what you think. You don't have to listen to it. My voice is kind of strange. Um, I have a weird affective accent. I have a mass speech impediment. And I come off as smug. I'm well aware. But if you don't tell me why you find me annoying, I can't benefit from that. It's just a statement of your affective state. As if I'm supposed to care about it, as if we have a social relationship in which I would care. And I have no idea why you think I would care about what you find annoying, nor should you care about what I find annoying about you unless we have some relational matrix in which we fit into each other. And a parasocial relationship is a one-sided relational matrix. You inherently know more about me than I do about you. Um, Nonetheless, I started thinking about this in general. First, I have spent a lot of my last 5 years studying and reading Christopher Lasch to try to write a book on him. But second, using that last research, I started thinking about what narcissism actually is. And I don't mean clinical narcissism, which has a very limited meaning that is basically coddled together by the American Psychological Association um, to justify treatment in an insurance form. What I think here is the inflation of the self and the inflation of emotive reasoning. So people who believe that their morality, which they justify not by some rule or virtue or teleology or even some goal, but their general social milieu, is the same as their emotive preferences. And people get really hung up on these things. So you have the anti-cultural warriors who are obsessed with the cultural war. They live and breathe trying to complain about people talking about pronouns or um, really think that somehow tenure track professors in the humanities secretly run the world. Now, I get that actually there's this masking of what's actually happening with the morality of humanities education. Elite humanists work in institutions that's primary purpose is to own land, build endowments, and separate people into social strata within the various classes. That's really their job. All the equity that they talk about that is in some ways a way to offset what they actually do and maybe expand the number of people represented in the elites as if representation amongst different groups is the same as those groups having access to material goods or something like that. I get that those people are super frustrating. But you know what else is super frustrating? People who take every single sign to go off about that while pretending to be above it. So we're above the culture war, but that's all we can talk about. That really says that you don't have the self-control or the self-awareness to rein in your emotional responses. The question is, Not that people have this character flaw, and not even that I'm scolding people for the character flaw, because frankly, it's common enough that the question shouldn't be, what are you personally doing that leads you to this affective concern where you think everybody cares about your personal affective state? It's common enough that we have to start asking a social and material question larger than the individual morality category. Why do people think this? Why can't people separate an assertion of a belief or a premise with an argument that supports the premise? Even as the argument is post hoc justification, which psychologically we know it usually is, most people can't do that. I get comment after comment about how a guest was dumb or I was above my head. I'm actually quoting people verbatim, or the Bible and Plato proved that the universal language is geometry. Um, where these assertions are made, but they're not backed up. The mere shaming aspect of the assertion seems to be what people are attached to. And that has very little external function. Meaning, if people don't share your value set or know what you're talking about, if they're not an inside member of your inside group, it's a pretty useless tactic, but it's super common. We have to ask ourselves why. Why are people so effectively motivated they cannot break down that people may just not share their norms, or you have a complete disagreement over premises? Instead of admitting that there might be a counterposing logic and trying to argue that yours is better, you'll just call it stupid. But that is a self-flattering move. Why is the self-flattering move the move that so many of us go to? I don't have a clear answer for that, but it does seem to me that there's a hollowing out of social relations in real life. That whole 1 in 10 blue collar men have no friends, and like what 1 in 15 or something of all social classes in the English speaking world report having no friends, particularly if they're male. Uh, there's this screaming for recognition that so many people have, but instead of trying to prove worth, they don't feel like they can do that, so they just assert. Sometimes they might have a valid point, but no one will fucking know because they won't actually make the argument. They'll just insult people and think that will do anything but cause people to double down on what they priorly believe. If your goal is not really to convince anyone else, it's not socially performative for outsiders who don't accept your morality or assertions anyway. I mean, we see this with wokeness and anti-wokeness. If you don't share a bunch of political and moral claims and frankly epistemic assumptions about the world, the debate goes nowhere. Most of the time you end up stuff in Mont and Bailey's where people are making strong claims and you push them and they make a weaker claim and they defend the weaker claim even though they made the stronger one. Now, what I find interesting is I think there's something here about the hollowing out of self-presentation when we are so atomized that many kinds of in-person social communities don't seem viable. They seem like something you have to pay for. They're commodified to the point that even voluntary social associations are hard to exist. And when you add that to the fact that most people who try to rationalize their morality end up doing the opposite. I did this series that I abandoned on emotivism and morality, and I abandoned it because a lot of you didn't understand the critique. It was actually the hyper rationalist who ended up being the most encouraging of emotivism because their rules for morality were impossible. A universal law that you can calculate at any moment are trying to figure out what the maximum benefit to the maximum number of moral agents is when you don't even have an agreement on what moral agency our benefit would be. How do you rate pleasure over pain, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, if you're a certain kind of deontological thinker or a certain kind of utilitarian thinker, this could lead to antinatalism because you value the lack of pain more than the existence of pleasure, and therefore nothingness could be a result. No one actually lives that way, though. So trying to set yourself up with some kind of emotive rule or political rule, or worse, and this is super common on the left and in liberals, conflating what is politically efficient or our vision of a political morality or theology or whatever with personal and interpersonal theology, as if those are ever reducible to the same thing. The personal is political, so to say, ended up making the political personal. And it shows up in the way you talk. When you start with your own affective state as if somebody who doesn't know you is supposed to care, and then you move on to make some kind of assertion based off that, and then you don't give your reasoning for that assertion, what you're actually in some ways betraying is either you don't have good reasoning, or you don't think that it's possible for this to be reasoned through anyway. That the inability to separate norms and descriptors, which I will say can never truly be separated. This is one of the problems. Descriptors require judgments to figure out what goes in what categories. So you can't remove norms even from descriptions, which is why empiricists often sneak moral values in without even realizing it themselves. But you can't also reduce description and norms as if they're totally the same thing. There's an overlapping tension there. They inform each other, but they aren't the exact same as each other. Just like my nerve is connected to my eye, but I'm not going to say my eye is the same thing as my nervous system. It interfaces with it. My vision apparatus is required for both systems to work, and one cannot remove one from the other and it be functional. Thus, you can't remove affect from reason or reason from affect. They do inform each other, but pretending they're exactly the same is also going to be confusing and lead to systemic mistakes. See, how you parse categories and what you define as an object really does matter. So when you're fighting the culture war all the time, or you're trying to argue against me, or you're assaulting some really fun stuff like Plato and the Bible proved that universal language is geometry, which is interesting because I don't know how you can prove that with that statement, but at least it is a comprehensive statement that does put stakes on the line and is not truly emotive. You didn't prove it. It could be provable, but at least it's interesting and is clear about what the premise is. But so many people can't do that. Now, when I say this, people will go, oh, but you expect people to be reasoning agents all the time. No, I don't. In fact, I do not assume human beings are logic machines, nor do I assume reason is reducible to pure abstract logic or even linguistic logic or analytic logic or dialectical logic. Those are all different things. They're different modalities from each other. They have different purposes. One of the reasons why we talk about dialectic so much is part of what you're trying to deal with is defining premises and terms that are contentious. And how do you do that? Because in an analytic framework, if you don't agree on a definition and you don't agree on a stake, you really can't have a debate. Whereas in a dialectic format, you're debating the validity of the fundamental premises. Are they internally coherent? Can they be internally coherent? And in a historical sense, are they manifestable in the world? And can they cohere with the world? Can you make them be true? That requires sets of virtues, values, claims, all kinds of stuff that you have to lay out, work through, and debate. And most people that I interact with today don't seem capable of doing that. And it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they have a unique character flaw. I do find this to be a character flaw, but it's not unique. In fact, I would say it's more common than not. So we have to ask ourselves over and over and over again, what about contemporary society and the atomization of contemporary society leads people to thinking that their emotional states are something other people care about inherently? Because they don't. You haven't proved your worth to the people you're talking to often. But why do you feel like you have no worth to prove or you can't risk it? Because I think that's the question that we need to answer. What are the material conditions that lead people to thinking that their emotive states are enough, and that an assertion is valid just by making it. Sorry, even as an assertion of a true fact is not valid just because you asserted it. You actually do have to back yourself up. But why don't people feel like they can do that? What about social atomization means that everything feels like a sui generis expression of the self? In some ways, how does the overfocus on the self actually indicate a collapse of selfhood, because selfhood only makes sense in terms of relationality? I know who I am because I have a relation to you. At least that's how social beings work and not mere things. So I don't have an answer for this question. I'm going to be thinking a lot about it, because not only do I find it annoying, but I really don't know that you should care that I find it annoying. What we should all care about is, why is it so common? What does it say that it is so common? Particularly on the internet. In person, I get a lot less of this. People might think, "Oh, I find you annoying," but people are much less likely to say that kind of thing in person, because it is a perceived in person as a form of social violence. It might be responded to as a form of social violence. So people have better checks against that, but it can't just be the whole in-person social violence thing, negative reinforcement mechanism, that leads to all this, because frankly, parasocial relationships are not new at all. You know, we started studying them in the 1950s with the advent of television. So not a new thing. And really, when you start looking at the parasocial, people have parasocial relationships to beings that don't even exist, even as, like caricatures. So it's not just you might have a parasocial relationship with me. I'm at least an actual person. You could actually have a relationship with me, even if you never physically met me, by interaction over time. But there is no way to have a social relationship with a fictional character, because they don't exist. Yet parasocial relations often have that character too. There's something about the current moment that leads people in their isolation to think that their caring about something is actually enough. What is happening in social isolation that is leading to that? So that's my question today. I'd love to get your response. You can leave a response in the show notes. You can assert whatever you want. I only take them down when you guys are particularly abusive towards a guest. Otherwise, I'll maybe mock you or whatever. Usually, I just ignore you. But I do want some things here, some ideas here. Why is this so common? Why do you see people constantly feeling need to comment, but not actually comment anything other than the most base emotive response? It's literally reaction. The arguments often aren't there. Now, it's not true that I don't get arguments. I get sometimes good arguments. I've had good debates. People have shown me where I've made errors in my comments. It's not everybody. And even from people who do this, it's not every time they do it. But it's common enough that we have to ask ourselves, why is this statement of emotive factuality somehow taken as a political or moral statement? That's the first question. And the second question is, why do you think we should care if there's no relationality to make a moral our political community um, have any mutual obligation to each other? Are people so used to interacting with parasocial projections that that's really all they have left? What would be material reasons for that? What are the social reasons for that? And I do think we should ask these questions instead of just calling people annoying and flawed characters, because while that may be true, we're all annoying to somebody and probably annoying to everybody at some point. Um, the question is, why is it so much harder to get people to state their reasoning, even in a post hoc justificating fashion? Anyway, like and subscribe. If you have an answer to the question, I'd actually like to know. I don't have a clear one. I have a bunch of vague hunches. But I will admit that this is such a complicated phenomenon materially. It's psychological, it's sociological, it's media studies, it's actor network theory, etc., 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 that I don't feel like any one person can answer this question. So maybe collectively we could. All right. Let's make this an exercise in collective thinking. Protect your peace. Like and subscribe if you want more, and fuck off if you don't. Have a good day.